Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Moving Back to America. It is the 20th of December. Hope you all had a great Christmas holiday. I'm putting on my reading spectacles because we're about to get down to serious business today. Today's topic is the people versus Dr. Fauci, and this is a much wider topic than Dr. Fauci. I just want to check one thing here. Just to make sure that we are in business, because it'd be great if we could get enough new members so that we could hire an engineer for this, but I just want to make sure that the audio is looking good, and it appears to be. So here's the thing, folks. There's an article on Instapundit. Well, it's actually on American Thinker as linked to by Instapundit. And what I want to deal with today is the nature of what it is we're fighting against. You may think, oh, we're fighting against Dr. Fauci. Well, we're not really. Or we're fighting against the global warming alarmists, or we're fighting against the progressives, or we're fighting against the social justice warriors, or we're fighting against BLM, or we're fighting against all of this stuff. It all comes down to the same thing. I almost called today's episode Unmasked, but I figured this would be a little more on point. So before I get to the larger picture, let's talk about the smaller one in the reason we decided to call this episode The People versus Dr. Fauci. This is from American Thinker magazine. This article is by Andrea Widberg. She's got talking basically about how Dr. Fauci has essentially lied to us for our own good. I'm just going to take a snippet here. And this is Dr. Fauci rationale for basically lying to the American people. So, block quote here, in a telephone interview the next day, Dr. Fauci acknowledged that he had slowly but deliberately been moving the goalposts. He is doing so, he said, partly based on new science and partly, here it comes, on his gut feeling that the country is finally ready to hear what he really thinks. And there's a snip, and it said Dr. Fauci said that weeks ago he hesitated to publicly raise his estimate because many Americans estimate of herd immunity. Many Americans seemed hesitant about vaccines, which they would need to accept almost universally in order for the country to achieve herd immunity. Now that some polls are showing that many more Americans are ready, even eager for vaccines, he said he felt he could deliver the tough message that the return to normal might take longer than anticipated. Okay. This is the enemy that we're fighting. This is the enemy that stole the election. This is the enemy that has basically been locked with the American people in a death struggle for 50, 60 years now. And actually, that's completely short-sighted. What we are facing here is not Dr. Fauci. He's just another one of the milestones on the road to hell that is presumably paved with good intentions. He is one of hundreds of thousands of data points that go back pretty much as far as human history goes. So let's just be clear about what we are up against here as Americans and as free people. As I said at the very first episode, we're way past Republicans and Democrats and conservatives and liberals at this point. We really are down to the brass tacks now. And the brass tacks are very simple. We are in a death struggle against people who think they know more about how to run your life than you do, versus you and me. We are in a life and death battle with the elitists who have constantly plagued human history in the exact same way that the murderers and criminals have always plagued human history. The two things that humanity has always had to carry on its back as a burden, as a weight, as an anchor to hold us back from happiness and prosperity and all the rest, really come in two flavors. There's the horseback mounted warrior who doesn't grow anything, doesn't build anything, can't make anything, simply exists to exert violence on civilizations and peaceful people in order to steal food, steal women, steal ornamentation, gold, pottery, whatever they want. And then they ride back off and they come back again. These people are the people who prey on common citizens. They're the people who prey on common citizens through violence and murder. They've always been here. They always will be here. And generally speaking, we have a pretty good handle on these people as a general rule. There are certainly places in the United States where crime is far more rampant than in other places in the United States, but at least in some places in the United States, these tend to be the most heavily armed places. The criminal on horseback, the Mongol rider out of the plains, is largely in his box, and that's largely due to the fact that we recognize that threat, and a lot of Americans are heavily armed. And as I pointed out in my firewall called Number One with a Bullet, turns out the places in America that have the highest per capita gun ownership are the safest places in the country because we're prepared to defend ourselves against the Mongol swordsman, which is the modern day criminal who preys upon peaceful, good, decent, hardworking people who've never done harm to anybody. And this is a good thing. This is the way it should be. It should be filled with peaceful, hardworking, honest citizens who trade freely amongst each other, and everybody's boat rises. And people have always been determined to steal that, murder people, and do what they have to do because that's a nature of one of the ancient foes of civilization and good. And I don't mean goodness, I mean good, forces of good. The other threat to good comes from an entirely different direction and is much more difficult to deal with. And this needs to be understood not because of sympathy for the people I'm talking about, like Dr. Fauci, who I think is a deadly enemy of freedom. But if you don't understand this, then you will not understand what you're fighting. And so when I tell you what I'm about to tell you, so many people are so on edge now, and I understand this, I really do, that anything that sounds like an explanation automatically is heard as mitigation, and it's not mitigation. You cannot fight what you do not understand. And if you do not understand it, then you're going to lose. And I'm not going to lose this fight. Neither are you. So listen carefully. One of the reasons that the kind of threat posed by Dr. Fauci is so dangerous is because Dr. Fauci does not see himself as an evil supervillain whose goal is to take over the world and eliminate freedom and free thought. If you don't understand that the fundamental conscious motive, that's different than the subconscious motive, is for the public good, then you will never understand the psychology of the people that are strangling the freedom right out of this country. If you don't understand that, you will never understand them. That is not to mitigate them, and it's not to basically even to forgive them, but you have to understand them. When I was in acting school, you never know where wisdom will come from, and certainly this seems to be the most likely place, unlikely place. When I was in acting school and we were talking about characters and breaking down characters, every good story, every play it's worth a damn has a villain. And since there's a villain in every play, somebody has to portray the villain. And so the question then becomes for the actor who's portraying the villain, how do you understand the villain? How do you get inside his head and make him believable? Now, badly written villains are just simply Simon Legree, their mustache twirling, they're they're Mr. Burns. Actually, yes, man has always dreamed of blocking out the sun. Burns is a cartoon villain on The Simpsons, and that's what's funny about him. But real villains, scary villains, like Iago, for example, in Othello, written by a dead white male you probably shouldn't even be hearing about because of his toxic effects on civilization. But if you're going to play what is widely considered to be the greatest villain ever written, which is Iago in Othello, you have to understand Iago. And the thing about understanding Iago or any other villain, Darth Vader, or any other villain, and including real-life villains like Stalin and Hitler and Mao, you cannot understand them and you cannot fight them if you do not realize that there's not a person in the world of historical significance that woke up and said every single day, how can I be as evil as possible? If you don't get this, then we're starting this fight with a bad handicap. Adolf Hitler committed the atrocities he committed because he thought he was acting for the good of himself and his people. Same with Stalin, same with Mao. And if you don't understand that it is this draw, this psychological draw that I'm doing good, I'm doing things that I may not particularly like ethically, but the larger good is more important, so therefore I'm going to do it. If you don't understand that, you'll never understand those major criminals. You never understand minor criminals like Dr. Fauci. You'll never understand how the press works. You'll never understand how the Hollywood system works. You won't understand anything if you don't understand that the conscious motivation of people like Dr. Fauci and all the rest of them is that they are doing good. The reason we don't have a press anymore, and we haven't for a long time, is because it has become a matter of instruction and peer pressure for members of what used to be the press to know that it is no longer about reporting facts and reporting what is actually happening. You will do that if it advances the greater good, but if it retards the greater good, if it reflects badly on a candidate you think is more good for the future, like Joe Biden, let's say, then not only will you not report on that story, you will suppress that story. And you will not only not be doing your job, you'll be doing the antithesis of your job, but you'll be doing it for a good reason. And this is the conscious fig leaf that the enemies of mankind and freedom have always used, and those enemies are the elitists. They're the elitists. The Mongols on the plains, the criminals, whatever you want to call them, the predators are easy to identify because they're primitive and they use violence. The other enemies on the other end of the spectrum are people who are usually extremely gifted rhetorically and often gifted with great intelligence. And this is the fig leaf that they use in order to not only convince themselves, but to convince enormous numbers of people, that what they're actually doing is for the public good. Now, I want to talk about Dr. Fauci specifically before we get into the wider aspects of this particular brand of villain on the road to hell, which of course is paved with good intentions. For Dr. Fauci to say that I can now finally reveal to the American people the truth, because I think finally now they're ready to accept it. That statement, which is not a direct quote, by the way, but is certainly a concise summation of what Dr. Fauci thinks. That statement is filled with the single great vice that all of these enemies of freedom have, and that is the vice of pride. Not the kind of pride you might have from achieving something worthwhile, not the pride you might have in your country, which is not a personal pride so much as it is a pride of achievement and goodness. Now, I'm talking about the kind of pride that makes you look longer in the mirror and go out there and lie to people convinced that you are doing this for their good, which is your psychological fig leaf. It's your shield for saying, I want them to do what I say. We did a right angle show last week where I got a chance to quote Thomas Sowell, who was talking about another philosopher who had said that the problem with intellectuals is that they can never operate at room temperature. And Sowell went on to say, and as always, he's perfectly insightful and on the point. Dr. Sowell went on to say that without a crisis, then what good is an intellectual? What's the point of being smarter than everybody else and having this incredible knowledge and all of these letters after your name if you don't get to enforce it upon the average Joe? Have you ever wondered why Gavin Newsom allowed feces to exist on the streets of San Francisco in such quantities? It's because Gavin Newsom doesn't have to walk through that stuff and everybody else does. But when you're dealing with somebody like Dr. Fauci, what you're dealing with is this. You are dealing with the opinion of a man who is convinced that he knows what is best for the country and best for the people of the country. And how many times have we seen this? How many times have we seen somebody go into a deli or something, gun people down, screaming Allahu Akbar at the top of their lungs, and then have press report after press report after press report saying motive remains unclear? Why is that? What's going on there? What's going on there in that case is that is the combined big brains in the media saying to themselves and to each other that we cannot tell Americans the truth about this attack, because if we do, these savages out there, these ignorant, knuckle-dragging savages, will then go into every single Muslim's home and drag every single innocent Muslim out of their houses and beat him to death on the street with a tire iron. That's what they believe we are. And do you know why that's what they believe we are? They believe we're that violent, that uncontrolled, that impulsive because they are themselves. And this is proven fact psychologically that members of the press are sub-average intelligence, prone to emotionalism, prone to sentimentality, and prone to impulsive behavior. So, You will often see this when you talk with people about gun ownership, and you will often talk to somebody who is a vehement gun control advocate. And when they find out that you have a gun in your house, they go into immediate panic attack, and in many cases, they'll just leave. And if you have a chance to pin one of these, I'm talking about the people who are like absolutely fanatical about this. When you ask them, what is it about this weapon that you fear so much? What they will say is, well, what if you get angry? Well, what do you mean? Well, what if you, I've been angry at my wife. What if you get really angry? With a gun in the house, you could just shoot him. And now you get down to the brass tacks. You find out that what that person is feeling is a projection of their own lack of control. It's a projection of their own impulsiveness onto you. And since that person knows in their guts that they don't trust themselves with a deadly weapon in the house, they are therefore not willing to trust you with one either. And this is how it works. So Dr. Fauci is convinced, in the same way that the members of the press are with the Muslims and so on, Dr. Fauci is convinced that if he told the scientific truth to the American people, then they wouldn't behave according to the way that he thought was best. And so, in all of our interests, of course, in order to save lives and all of the other noble reasons that he is no doubt constantly filling himself with, he had to lie to the American people in order to slowly bring us along to the terrible, terrible realization that none of us are really fit to look at from the beginning. Now, that alone would be disgraceful and disgusting enough if he was actually correct. But as it turns out that in virtually all of these cases, they're not only lying to us in order to get people to do what they think is best for us. In most of these cases, turns out they're not even right about that, but we'll get to that in a minute. So when Dr. Fauci makes an admission that essentially says, yes, I lied, but I lied so that we could slowly get to a point where people could face the truth. When you get right down to it, the motivation is, I'm doing this for other people's good. That's what he's telling himself. But the actual motivation, the thing behind the fig leaf, is this. I know what's going on, and these idiots not only don't know what's going on, they're not capable of knowing what's going on, and if I explained to them what was going on, they still wouldn't be able to do the right thing. And if that's the place you're coming from, and this is the battle we fight with elitists all across the board, everywhere, every day, is this attitude. If that attitude is true, then the entire idea of democracy, and I don't mean democracy in the sense of like a democracy versus a republic, I mean self-governance. If that is true, then the entire idea of self-governance is a delusion that has to be slowly phased out. The reason you'd steal an election from the American people is not because you wake up and say, I'm a supervillain and I can't wait to no. The motivation for this kind of theft and the motivation for the acquiescence on the part of the tech companies and the mainstream media and all of the conscious motivation, the lie that they tell themselves, and they believe this, is that they are doing it for the public good. Because if they were to face the truth of their motivations, they wouldn't be able to live with themselves. It would cause them emotional distress. They would face cognitive dissonance. If they were to ever realize that, no, the reason I'm doing this is because I know better for you what to do with your life than you do. I believe I'm better than you are. In fact, I know I'm better than you are. And you people out there are essentially just a herd of workers who are so stupid that you like to race fast cars and wave American flags and all the rest of the things that you knuckle-dragging, low-sloping forehead savages out in flyover country do. Thank God that there are coastal elites like me and other people that I met at Harvard and Yale who fully understand the human condition and are able to guide you through this delicate phase of transition from factory work into the information age. And if we told you the truth, you would just do the wrong thing anyway. So you should actually be grateful that we're here. And to hear Dr. Fauci mention this openly is an open admission of what I'd known the whole time. Well, that's actually not true. I want to say I'd known it the whole time. I hadn't known it the whole time. Because in the first couple of weeks of this, remember the 14 days to flatten the curve? In the first days of this COVID thing, I thought, okay, this seems reasonable. We don't know how bad it is. It's brand new. It's never been, no one has immunity to it. we'd better play it safe. There are millions of lives at stake. Which brings us to another piece of the COVID puzzle and Dr. Fauci and all the rest of these elitist experts. All of the panic and hysteria about COVID-19, Donald Trump closing down the economy, locking down the economy, all around the world, all of it was predicated on one computer model produced by one man at Oxford University. I'm virtually positive it was Oxford University, at the University of Oxford in England. One guy made one computer model that predicted that 83% of the population would become infected and that 2.5 million Americans would die and 650,000 Britons would die if they didn't lock everything down right now. And he was a scientist, and he was a virologist, and he was an epidemiologist, and here's his computer model, and it came out of a computer, so it must be true. But the point of this is, you can't really blame well-intentioned people for believing this in the face of no other information or knowledge. A guy's got a computer printout. He says, this is what I do for a living. I'm telling you, if you don't do this, then millions of people are going to die. Now, in a case like that, the smart play is to listen to the guy and do what he says, because in the early stages of this, there's no data, and he may be right. But as we got into April, you may remember April, 6, 7, 8 months ago now, as we got into April and we saw these crests that were predicted, each state, I remember this very clearly. California is going to peak on April 16th. Florida is going to peak on April 19th, so on and so on and so on. As the actual number of cases and fatalities didn't match the reality, that is when a healthy society would have said something along the lines of, it's beginning to look like we have overreacted to this disease out of an excess of caution, which we feel as your government was the appropriate response, and we hope you'll agree with us on that. Since we didn't know, the smart thing to do was to play it safe. Now we begin to understand more of what's happening in the real world as opposed to the computer models, and we're beginning to adjust our policies appropriately. What we're finding, this is what a truthful government would say. This is what a government not run by these elitist swine would say. Now that we have actual data on the number of people hospitalized, number of people of deaths, first of all, we wouldn't be doing things like counting somebody who got hit by a bus as a COVID death if they tested positive for COVID-19. We'd be dealing with the number of people who died of only COVID-19, and then we'd be dealing with people who died of COVID-19 because they were suffering from what turned out to be 2.6 comorbidities, serious conditions. After 2 to 3 weeks and the data started to come in, we would see that the recovery rate among young people is so close to 100% that it's essentially 100%. We'd find that no children, the closest whole number to the number of children even showing symptoms is 0. And we would begin to modify our public policy based on the information that was available, actual information, not computer models, and we would begin to make adjustments to how we were dealing with this pandemic. And we would then continue to refine our adjustments predicated on what we were actually seeing. And if our government had done that, and our health officials had done that, then they would have gained trust. They would have gained the trust that they originally had by default. I'm a health official from the Center for Disease Control. Well, obviously knows what he's talking about. They would have gained our trust. They would have started with trust, and they would have increased it because they would treat us like adults. But that's not what they did. That's not what they ever did, ever. From the beginning, they went with a computer model that was wildly, insanely inaccurate. And once actual virologists started to look at that computer model that came out of Oxford University, they were 3 lines into the code. They said, this is insane. No, 83% of the population, the 1919 flu, the Spanish flu, 1918, 1919, 23%, 27% of the population caught that. I think it was 23%. The swine flu virus, SARS or whatever, and all of those, 27% of the population. So the fundamental assumption was off by 3 orders of magnitude, was off by 300%. A sane society would understand, okay, we hadn't dealt with this before, so now it's time to deal with it and make adjustments. Not only did we not see that, we saw the exact opposite happen. We saw the exact opposite happen. We saw politicians become intoxicated with power, intoxicated with the fact that they can lift my finger and you will wear a mask and that restaurant will close and you won't go to Thanksgiving. I will. You can't go to a restaurant. You can't go to a restaurant. Restaurants are for those of us who are in charge. So I'll go out to the French Laundry and I'll have my $300-400 a plate dinner, knowing that you will never find out about it because the press also is in on this, you see. But these things happen like this. It's like Governor Newsom goes out to this fancy restaurant called the French Laundry. He not only tells other Californians you can't go outside, but he's basically shutting down California restaurants. Can't even eat outside anymore, too dangerous. So he goes to a dinner indoors, shoulder to shoulder with 12 other people, shoulder to shoulder, no masks. And imagine my surprise when you find out that these are medical professionals, medical lobbyists. All of them are fine. If they thought that this virus was as dangerous as they say it is, then that would be the last place these people would be. And as Glenn Reynolds at Instapundit likes to say, I'll believe this is a crisis when the people who are telling me that this is a crisis act like it's a crisis. So it is the people versus Dr. Fauci. This idea that the people can't handle the truth, that's really it. You can't handle the truth. That ought to be branded across every single one of their forehead. You can't handle the truth. We see this again and again and again and again and again and again and again. We see it with the global warming people who have scared an entire generation into absolute terror in order to get them to bend a knee to what they want. They will tell you, and they will tell themselves, that the reason that they're inflating these numbers is because the problem is so serious and people aren't doing enough about it, that we have to lie in order to get you idiots to understand what we understand. And what we understand is that we have a computer model that was designed by me and therefore infallible. And that is telling us what is happening. And just because the environment is not responding to the computer model is not my computer model's fault. That's the environment's fault. And you end up in this vortex of arrogance and pride and arrogance and just this elitist superiority. And did I mention arrogance? Because that's really the glue that holds all this together. Now, it bears mentioning, because this kind of on some level is the operational point. If the elitists were correct, it would still be repugnant, but you could at least say to yourself, okay, well, they're right. The people are too stupid to understand this, and they are looking out for our best interests. And this is an act of it's a white lie designed to save lives. If they were correct, then that would be justifiable. And by the way, if they were correct, if elements of society have become, well, plague has always been here, and so has climate change. So let's just say that if the ability to understand these things is so far beyond the average citizen of this country, and they are right, then what they're saying is that we now live in a post-democratic age where the will of the people is no longer paramount. It's no longer the law of the land. The people are too stupid to understand what's really going on. Now that we have science, we are going to have some kind of a scientific oligarchy, a semi-elected or probably mostly appointed group of very, very smart experts who will tell the rest of us what to do for our own good. And if they were correct, I'd still find that repugnant, but nevertheless, you could at least make a case for it. You could at least make a case for it. But just start from there before we go any further and think about what they think about you. What they think about you. And forget people like Dr. Fauci for a minute, because we're not just talking about a highly educated doctor who is guilty and prone to the same vices and distortions and emotional bias as all the rest of us, although they think that they're not. But this attitude that I'm smarter than you goes all the way down the elitist food chain. It goes from people like Dr. Fauci down to the politicians. The politicians who buy into this kind of thing, which is most of them, are basically saying, I'm going to tell you what to do. Take Gavin Newsom as a perfect example. I'm going to lock down this state of California, and I'm going to do it because it feels good. But I'm going to tell myself, and I'm going to tell you, that the reason I'm going to do it is for your own good. It's to save your lives. because this is a horrible disease and you people are still out there having fun and parties despite the orders that I've given. You're still going to the beach. And that means that this virus is going to continue. So I'm listening to the science, and I'm telling you, you have to stay indoors. So there you are, one level down. You have the uber elitist, the elitist, the kind of the proto-elitist in the form of the scientist. And the scientist makes a declaration that says that I know what's going on and you don't. Trust me on this one. That then becomes the authority for a second level of high-level politicians. And these politicians who have always had the same attitude as that guy, namely, I'm better than the people, obviously. What's the point of me running for office if I don't get to lord it over people? What's the point of me wanting to be a politician if I can't tell people what to do? So that second tier of people look to the first tier and they say, we are doing this not because we want to. Oh, heaven forbid, no. No, we're doing this because the science told us that this is what we have to do. And when they say the science, what they really mean is the scientist. There's a big difference between those two things. Below the level of top-level politicians comes the much larger army of bureaucrats, officials, health officials, county health inspectors, all of it, the whole middle bureaucracy, all of it. Mayor Garcetti and the public health system of Dubuque, Iowa, all the rest of these people who have heard from their politicians that this is what we have to do, and the politicians have heard from the scientists, so that's got to be fair. And they form another layer of people who think that they're better than everybody else because they get in on it and the rest of the idiots don't. And then below that, finally, you have two more layers. Below the layers of the bureaucrats and the minor officials who are trying to enforce this, all of the people, who we had to raid this party or we had to arrest this guy who was out there surfing by himself on the middle of the Pacific Ocean and all the rest of that. Below that, now you get below the layer of the officials in government with coercive power. Below them is an even broader layer of very deep and wide layer of Karendom that is the average American citizen who's utterly bought into this whole thing, who's incapable of thinking for themselves, and who is determined to do the good of that the rest of the idiot sheeple can't do. And the Karen nation, the Karen layer, the strata of Karens, are citizens who are convinced that the mid-level bureaucrats that have told them that the politicians who have been repeating what the scientists said are absolutely right, and they're going to enforce this upon their fellow citizens because it gives them a feeling of power and it gives them a feeling of intellectual and moral superiority. So if there's a party going on next door and there are 12 cars in the parking lot or whatever, then the Karens will make a call to the local police and say, there's a group of people having a party. I've seen 20 people in there and none of them are wearing masks. And now the police have no choice but to respond because they're on that third tier because they've been told by the upper level politicians who've been told by the scientists, and on and on and on and on and on we go. And then the final bottom level is the widest one of all, and those are just the regular citizens who happen to be able to agree with all of this. And these people, I've said before, it's tough to blame them when they don't hear anything else, although you do have to make the case that at some point or another you either think for yourself or you don't. So here's the hierarchy of elitist autocracy. Here's the hierarchy of I'm better than you are, I'm smarter than you are, I'm more educated than you are, more aware than you are, I'm more morally advanced than you are. And here's the hierarchy that is going to determine what you are going to do with your life. And that's basically how it works. Now we have to examine whether or not this entire system is accurate. If it is saving lives of people who are too stupid to otherwise know, then they're still lying to people, and the entire idea of self-governance is out the window. But if it actually were true, then you could at least put some kind of a moral weight on its side of the balance pan. So is it true? Well, no, it's not true. And you know what? It's never true. It's never true. They're never right. Ever. They may be right about the initial problem. They may be right about the fact that there's a ping coming back from nature that is alarming. That initial moment of actual science and actual concern often is justified and important. But from that point forward, this entire psychological mechanism kicks in. Oh my God, there's a hole in the ozone layer and the entire Earth is going to be sterilized because these CFCs are going up there and destroying the ozone. And nobody knows about it, but I do. Okay, that's important knowledge. That's something that the population of Earth should know about. But it doesn't go that way. Well, nobody's going to stop using their hairspray, so now we have to say if we don't do something about this right away, then everybody's going to die in the next 3 or 4 years. And then the entire political, scientific gorgon kicks into high gear and pushed very hard by the idiots in the media whose primary motivation in life is to be smarter than everyone else, or at least appear to be. We get all the hysteria about all this stuff. Now, it turns out that the ozone hole thing, there's a lot about that just plain wasn't true. Almost everything you know about the ozone hole is fundamentally not true. And we only know it's not true now because we're 30 years, 40, 50 years past the fact and all of these internal things come out. We see the same thing with the global warming alarmists who say that the climate is changing and the people aren't doing what we tell them to do. So now we're going to have to increase these numbers and ramp up the fear and ramp up the hysteria to get them to do what we're sure they're going to do. And we're sure that they're going to have to do this because my model says so. The computer model that I built, me, with all of my degrees and my knowledge of the atmosphere and how everything works, or virology, or all the rest of it, that is telling me that this is going to be a catastrophe. Thank God for me and my model and my credentials and my virtue. So if we have to lie to the people in order to get them to do the right thing to save themselves, then they should be thankful to me. And Fauci's got this in spades. And you can see this again and again and again. Sometimes you can see it in areas that have nothing to do with science or anything else. You know, on the way in today when I was thinking about this topic, good Lord, time flies when you're having fun. One of the examples that I thought about of this kind of thing, strangely enough, was the behavior of everybody involved with the O.J. Simpson case, which is a while ago now, and I want to say 95, wasn't it, for people? But if you remember the O.J. Simpson case, what you found was all of a sudden you've got the entire world focused on this courtroom. And Judge Ito all of a sudden starts acting like he's a member of a boy band. And Marcia Wallace, is it Marcia? Marcia Clark. Marcia Clark comes in with a brand new hairstyle. People talk about that for days and days and days. And they start preening and they start posturing and they start maneuvering for the cameras and they stop doing their jobs. And a guy with blood on his gloves, professional actor who's trying to put on a pair of gloves over rubber gloves and spreading his fingers. Well, I can make any pair of gloves you give me look like it doesn't fit. It's not hard. And on and on and on it goes. Hey, look at that. We're out of time. But this is the enemy, folks. The enemy is people who think that they know better than you and they don't. And I'll just wrap with this one example that is critical to understand. I'm going to do more research about this so I can come up with more ammo. But this is all you need to know. One of the first things I ever wrote was the problem with an elitist is he thinks he knows more about running the gas station on the corner of Sepulveda and Burbank. He thinks he knows better how to run that gas station than the guy that actually runs the gas station on Sepulveda and Burbank. He doesn't know anything about the guy's relationship with his brother-in-law, who's a tire distributor and allows him to sell tires at lower price. None of that, none of that. They don't know anything. They think they do. So you've got this entire group of elitists who are sure that they're smarter than everyone else. And they are convinced that this is the answer. But here's the part of reality that I find fascinating and that our founding fathers understood and that common people understand too. I went to the first of my speaking events, and every now and then, well, not every now and then, most of the time, I come out of Hollywood and I go to Minnesota, someplace. And I see regular people. And for the first time or two, I'm ashamed to say, I thought, wow, this crowd's not exactly the, gee whiz crowd. And to my credit, I immediately realized after the second time I caught myself thinking this vile thought, I said, what's the matter with me? This guy in the coveralls here knows 50 things more than I do, hundreds of things more than I do, better than I do, and is probably an acknowledged expert in the world on at least one or two of those things. Who the hell do I think I am? And this realization is what really gets us away from the pride and the arrogance necessary for this elitist worldview. But here's the story, and here's the actual way the universe functions, and it's not really difficult to understand. It's just true. It just is true. There was a competition, and this has been proven again and again and again. It's not a one-off thing, but it's a great example of the phenomenon. There was a competition in the early 1900s in a resort town in England where there was a fair, and everybody came, and the prize was an ox. That's what they used to give away before they had cell phones and electronics to give away. They gave away an ox, which would be useful because it was largely country people in the south of England. And the prize was a brand new, healthy ox. It was probably a 1901 model. Big, 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 heavy animal. And in order to win the ox, all you had to do was come closest to guessing the weight of that ox. And anybody could enter the competition. Anybody. The town drunk could enter the competition. The toffee-nosed aristocrat down from London could enter the competition. Anybody who wanted to could put the guess of the weight of that ox into the jar with their name on it, and whoever came closest would win the ox. And a statistician and a mathematician was there, and he was very curious about this phenomenon. So he put a guess in along with everybody else, and the people who were guessing, by the way, in the crowd of thousands of people, there were a number of experts, and by experts I mean people who breed oxen for a living and professional butchers whose livelihood is determined by looking at something, cutting it into pieces, and selling that at a price. Experts were there, and they put their best weight for the ox, and somebody won the prize. But what this mathematician discovered, because he was fascinated by this, what he found was, and this is almost unbelievable, except when you think about it, it's got the absolute ring of truth to it. What he found was that the closest guess to the actual weight of the ox by far, was the average of every single one of the entries. In other words, if the town drunk comes in and says, I think the ox weighs a million pounds, it didn't matter. The statistical bullseye of thousands and thousands of observations, when they all averaged out, was the closest by far to the actual weight of the ox, closer than any one expert, closer than a consortium of the experts. That phenomenon is shown again and again and again. It is the wisdom of common people who individually may be off, but when taken as an aggregate, is the most accurate way to tell what's really happening. And if you look at how the American people have behaved to COVID, as opposed to what they've been told by people like Dr. Fauci, what you find is that the American people have a far, far, far better idea of what this virus is and isn't, and its level of danger, than the experts are telling them. They have a far better idea of what it is, and they're not wrong. And they're not constantly moving the goalpost because they're dealing with reality. They have triangulated in upon the answer in the same way that the people guessed the weight of the ox. Now, people who have gone and studied this phenomenon later said that this is universally true. It functions on virtually every case they've ever tried it on, that a number of people guessing, averaging the guesses, is closer to the right answer than the closest expert gets to. But there's a caveat here, and it's a very important caveat. This phenomenon only works under with two preconditions. One of them is that the crowd has to be diverse, and by diverse it means there cannot be any selection in the crowd. You have to take everybody's experience and throw it into the mix. If you were to just take farmers, or just take noblemen, or just take butchers or whatever, no, you lose it. You have to take the combined wisdom of everybody, and so the group has to be absolutely heterogeneous, I guess. There cannot be any influence on the selection of the people in the group. That's number one. And the more important thing that they found was that there can be nobody influencing the group. And the best way to think about that is this. If there are thousands of people around this fair looking at this massive animal with a sheet of paper, writing their name on it and guessing the weight of it, and somebody stands up and says, look, I'm a butcher, and I'm telling you that thing weighs 850 pounds, within a pound or two. If somebody makes that statement, then all of the other people who thought it might have weighed 700 pounds or 1,000 pounds, all of them will say, well, he's an expert. I'm going to move closer to 850. I'm going to say 852. And that is what happens when the media and scientists and all the rest of it get involved. They start affecting people's natural observations and start pulling them away from what they would normally do using their common sense because of the pull of the authority. Well, he's a butcher, or he's a farmer. He breeds ox. He knows better than I do. So why don't I just either let him vote, or I'll move my vote closer towards him because he's an expert and I'm just a guy. Well, as it turns out, that the just a guys always are correct. Always. And it's the experts that are wrong. But when you have a news media that does nothing but broadcast what the experts are saying, it pulls the wisdom of the crowds off of the average, off of the target, off of the truth, the truth, the truth, the truth. And the wailing of these experts influences everybody else's vote and moves them off of the bullseye, which is, here's what I'm seeing and this is the decision I'm making. I think that ox weighs this. And it shifts their opinion off of the truth towards what a number of experts think is the truth, and the entire effect collapses and falls away. So now you know how all this works. Now you know why democracy, the rule of the people, has produced the most amazing society in the history of the world in terms of advancing human condition, science, culture, art, defense, all of it. This experiment works because this is the experiment of guessing the ox. This is the experiment. The American experiment is the experiment of, it is finally in all of history finally understood that no one is smarter than all of us, that none of us are smarter than all of us, that all of us together have the best answer no matter how weird and how far out of balance your individual position is. The absolute intelligence of the group is the ultimate form of wisdom and always has been. And that's why America's done so well. And that's why these people hate it so. That's why they hate it so much. That's why these leftists and these progressives and all, not just them, all of the elitists, anybody who says, I know what's better for you than you do, hate it, that there's a group of people who are self-determined, self-determining, and wiser than they are. They can't stand it, and they are locked in a death struggle to destroy it. And I'm not going to let that happen, and you're not either. We need your help. In the same way that the average number of people will get the right answer on any question, I need everybody's help in the same way that the experts have George Soros and Zuckerberg and all of these billions of dollars. I've got common citizens like you. So if this story makes any sense to you, because it's true, not because I said it, just because it's true, you can look up all of it, then I could just simply ask you to help support us here by either becoming a member at BillWhittle.com, which has been tremendous, and that is ongoing support. But if you don't want to do that, you can make a one-time donation. Link is directly below us. I used to not ask for help, but I look at what happened when I didn't ask for help, and now I realize, no, we are all in this together, and nobody gets a free ride. So that'll do it for this edition of Moving Back to America. We will see you tomorrow, 29th of December, and until then, have a good day. Don't let these bastards ruin your entire holidays, and don't ever forget that all of us together are smarter than any one of us or any group of us. And don't let that wisdom and don't let that historical anomaly of belief in the people slip away because you didn't do anything when you knew the hour was late. Okay? We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.